Good morning, I'm Angelo Castro III.
I'm Angela, and we are the Castros.
We bring you the news.
And the views that make you think.
Sometimes we agree.
Sometimes we don't.
This is News and Views.
And here are today's headlines.
President Donald Trump says the United States will temporarily run Venezuela after U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
Eastern parts of the country are experiencing rainy conditions due to various weather systems.
Post-holiday travel continues to pick up as thousands of passengers return to Metro Manila following the long break.
President Bongbong Marcos is set to sign the 2026 General Appropriations Bill into law today.
First in the news, heavy rains continue to wreak havoc across parts of the Visayas and Mindanao, triggering floods, landslides, and damage to infrastructure. Here's the report.
Several motorists were inconvenienced along the National Highway in Manhuyod, Negros Oriental after heavy rains flooded a large portion of the road. According to the uploader, the flooding was also caused by a dike in the area giving way due to the intensity of the rainfall. In other sections of the highway, rushing floodwaters continued to surge, leaving some motorists stranded. Flooding was also reported in the several barangays in the town, with some homes and roads already submerged. In Samar, knee-deep floodwaters entered homes in the barangay Lumalaog in the town of Las Navas. Some residential yards already resembled rivers. In Barangay Trangi in Catarman, a public restroom collapsed after the ground beneath it eroded and was swept away by the river. Homes nearby were also nearly swallowed by floodwaters as soil continued to soften due to persistent rain. Several houses in the town of Magsaysay Dolores were also flooded. Rivers overflowed into adjacent roads as water level continued to rise amid bad weather. In the town of Canavid, floodwaters reached home in Barangay Kamantang. Even the waiting shed was submerged and looked like a fish pond due to knee-deep flooding as water continued to rush through the area. In Basay, Samar, floodwaters submerged nearly all classrooms of the school just as students were set to return for the opening of classes. In Leyte, several barangays roads in the town of Tabon-Tabon became impassable after river waters overflowed, triggering severe flooding along major roads. In this part of Culaba, Biliran, a landslide occurred due to heavy rains. Mud and rocks were scattered along the highway, prompting firefighters to immediately conduct clearing operations. Meanwhile, in Concepcion, Iloilo, at least 15 boats were damaged last night due to bad weather. Residents said strong waves battered the shoreline of Barangay Igbon, causing extensive damage. For News 5, I'm Bril Montalvo. We are One News.
Several local government units have suspended classes today, January 5, due to inclement weather. In the Bicol region, affected areas include Malinao, Tabaco City, Bakakay, Malilipot, and Tiwi in Albay, Caramoan in Camarines Sur, and Batuan in Masbate. In Central Visayas, authorities have canceled classes in Tabogon, Cebu, as well as Bindoy and Manduyod in Negros Oriental. Eastern Visayas sees widespread suspensions in Leyte and the provinces of Biliran, Northern Samar, Eastern Samar, and Samar. Meanwhile, in Northern Mindanao, classes are suspended in Gingoog City, Misamis Oriental.
And for more weather updates, we have Pagasa weather specialist Grace Castañeda. Grace, good morning.
Yes po, good morning din sa ating lahat. Sa kasalukuyan po, tatlong weather systems pa din yung patuloy na nagdudulot ng mga pagulan sa iba't ibang bahagi po ng ating bansa. Ang shear line, may mga kalat-kalat na pagulan pa rin na dala sa buong bahagi ng Visayas, Bicol Region, Quezon, Oriental Mindoro, Marinduque at sa bahagi din ng Romblon. Patuloy pa rin po na paminsan malalakas yung mga pagulan na mararanasan natin, lalong-lalo na sa area ng Bicol Region at Eastern Visayas, dyan po sa summer provinces. Kaya naman doble ingat pa rin sa banta ng mga pagbaha at pagguho ng lupa. Samantalang easterlies naman, magdadala din ng mga kalat-kalat na pag-ulan sa Zamboanga Peninsula, Basilan, Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, maging sa area din ng Palawan. Ang amihan naman, patuloy pa rin naka-apekto sa malaking bahagi ng Luzon. Magiging maulap pa rin po yung kalangitan. May mga light rains pa rin sa Cordillera and Mistive Region, Cagayan Valley, Aurora, Laguna, Batangas at nalalabing bahagi pa po ng Mimaropa. While dito naman sa Metro Manila and sa nalalabing bahagi ng ating bansa, magiging bahagyang maulap hanggang sa maulap po yung ating kalangitan. Possible lang yung mga isolated light rains nadulot ng amihan for the rest of Luzon, where for the rest of Mindanao naman ay may mga isolated rain showers pa rin na dala ng easterlies. For now po, wala tayong minomonitor pa din na LPA or bagyo sa anumang bahagi ng ating bansa. At yan po muna ang latest, Sir Diego and Miss Angela, dito po sa weather forecasting ng Pag-asa. Maraming salamat po.
Grace, for the next few days, may binabantayan ba tayong possible na LPA or bagyo?
For now po, Sir Diego, wala po tayong namomonitor pa. Though meron po tayong mga namataan na cloud clusters dito po sa may bandang Palawan, sa may west po ng Palawan. But for now po, wala pa po tayong nakikitang defined na circulation in relation po dito sa mga cloud cluster na ito.
Okay, and Grace, of course, ano yung lowest recorded temperature natin so far dito sa because of amihan?
So far po, dahil po dito sa amihan, patuloy nga po tayong nakaka-record or patuloy pa pong nagiging mababa yung mga temperatura natin, lalong-lalo na po yan sa area ng Northern Luzon. So for this month of January po, yung pagpasok po nitong taon na po nito, 13.4 po yung naitala natin na lowest so far. Kahapon po ito ng January 4 sa area ng Baguio City. While for nung nakaraang buwan naman po or during this amihan season, nakapagtala na po tayo ng lowest natin na 9.6.
Oh, wow.
Diyan po yun sa area ng BSU sa may Benguet din po nung December 30.
Okay. And lastly, until when are we going to experience itong amihan for this year?
Yes, so generally yung amihan po na-experience natin hanggang first half ng March. Pero by that time po, possible sa may area na lang siya ng Northern Luzon or extreme Northern Luzon. But expect po natin for most area ng Luzon hanggang February po, possible pa rin na maramdaman po natin yung epekto ng amihan. So for this month, January and February, posible po makapag-tala po tayo na mas mababang temperatura.
All right, thank you so much for the updates, Pag-asa weather specialist Grace Castañeda.
Global tensions are rising after U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a surprise operation, with President Donald Trump saying Washington will temporarily take control of the oil-rich nation. Here's the report.
The United States attacked Venezuela and captured its long-serving President Nicolas Maduro in an overnight operation on Saturday. U.S. President Donald Trump promised to put the country under American control for now, including by deploying U.S. forces if necessary. Speaking at a press conference at his Mar-a-Lago club in Florida, Trump said the U.S. would continue to oversee its involvement in Venezuela until such time as they can do a safe, proper and judicious transition, signaling an open-ended U.S. role in the country.
So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious, because that's what we're all about.
But U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested that the U.S. would not govern Venezuela day to day other than enforcing an existing oil quarantine on the country. They stood in contrast to Trump's broad but vague claims that the U.S. would at least temporarily run the oil-rich nation. Comments that suggested some sort of governing structure under which Caracas would be controlled by Washington.
Well, as I said, we retain all the options we had before this raid and this capture and this arrest was made. We continue. The quarantine is in place right now. If you are a sanctioned boat and you are headed towards Venezuela, you will be seized either on the way in or on the way out with a court order that we get from judges in the United States. We will continue to enforce our sanctions. And that is going to continue to happen until such time as changes are made.
The U.S.-Venezuela tensions intensified under Trump after Washington imposed sweeping sanctions, recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president, and pursued a maximum pressure campaign to isolate Nicolas Maduro's government. The Philippines, for its part, is closely monitoring the evolving situation in Venezuela. The Department of Foreign Affairs is calling on all concerned parties to resolve disputes peacefully and avoid actions that could further escalate tensions.
Now, some Filipino lawmakers denounced the U.S. strike on Venezuela, calling it a violation of international law and warning of its potential global repercussions. Here's the report.
Several Filipino lawmakers strongly condemned the United States following its military strike against Venezuela. Senator Risa Hontiveros described the strike as a serious breach of international law, warning that such action could embolden powerful nations to use force for self-interest, placing other countries at risk of external aggression. Senator Amy Marcos said the developments in Venezuela highlight long-standing concerns over major powers interfering in the internal affairs of strategically important states. She warned that forcibly removing a foreign leader from their country could violate international law and send troubling signals to the global community. Senator Jingoy Estrada, however, said it was premature to determine whether the United States had violated international law. Meanwhile, Representative Laila de Lima stated that the move undermines decades of progress achieved through the United Nations. She called on Congress to initiate high-level consultations with relevant agencies and experts to formulate a coordinated and strategic response. Representative Percy Sendanya called the attack an illegal invasion that should give Filipinos a pause, especially after President Trump admitted interest in Venezuela's oil reserves.
Oh, yeah. Of course, all over the world has been talking about this recent event in Venezuela, most especially the recent arrest of its President Maduro.
Nicolas Maduro. So,
Ang
madaming
daming mga issues. Of
two
course,
sides
yung
to a
usapin
story.
ng petrodollar ba yan? Diba? Of course, yung ina-accuse kay Trump, even noon pa ni Hugo Chavez, yung mentor daw ni Maduro, na talagang he's been eyeing the oil reserves of Venezuela. But of course, before we...
All right,
so we could
joining
talk
us
further
now
about
is,
it.
let's get right to it. No? We have with us Dr. Romel Banlawi, President of the Philippine Society for International Security Studies. Prof, thank you for joining us.
Yes, good morning, Angelo, and good morning, Angela. Good morning to everyone.
All right, Prof, one of the big news items that came out over the weekend, of course, yung nangyari sa Venezuela. From a security perspective, no, sa international community, gaano ka-significant ito, the way they removed the president sa Venezuela?
For me, this is the biggest security issue in the 21st century thus far, because it raises a lot of issues about the current world order. It is not only about the arrest of President Maduro, but also the emergence of a new world order, because apparently, under the current situation, President Trump's decision to attack Venezuela is undermining the very core concept of state sovereignty and internal affairs to the non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states.
All right. Well, we know naman that of course, President Maduro has been long a dictator and a very vicious one. Ang issue kasi dito is who decides moving forward daw kung sino ang presidenteng kailangan tanggalin o hindi. But definitely, sabi nila, yung people of Venezuela need a democracy. But sino ang magiging arbiter ngayon moving forward?
Well, that begs the question now, because the action of the United States is being questioned not only by the international community, but also by the American public also. You see, some American legislators are questioning the decision of Trump because it fails to get the approval of the U.S. Congress on the use of military force against foreign countries. So now, it challenges the very idea of international world order that we created after Second World War. The principle of the post-World War II international order was to uphold international law in order to maintain international peace and security on the basis of respect for the sovereignty of all states. But now, it's under challenge. Now it's no longer the use of law, but the use of force. So the question now is, who will account the United States for
Correct.
doing such kind of action? So let's see. We are also contemplating on that as scholars of international relations.
That's right.
We are reflecting on the various consequences of U.S. actions against Venezuela.
Before I move on to Asia, ang tanong ko dito kasi, Prof, parang hindi rin naman ito bago sa ginawa ng US before. You have Libya, you have the invasion, you have also Iraq, no? But wala masyadong pushback from these movements because they removed also dictators. Bakit medyo nag-iba ang pananaw ngayon ng international community when Maduro has been likened to these leaders who were removed?
Yes, so now it demonstrates that under the current leadership of Donald Trump, it's realism in international politics. It's we call it the real politics now. It's because the U.S. can do it.
Yeah, that's right.
It has the capability to do what it did in Venezuela.
That's right.
Now the question is, who will account the U.S. for doing such if it offends the position of other sovereign states? So it's a challenge to existing international order, and it is also a challenge to existing political order in the United States. So it's challenging a lot of things that we know in international politics. So we scholars are seriously monitoring the outcome of U.S. action.
But what happens now in Venezuela? While, Trump said, no, U.S. will run Venezuela, but even the Vice President ng Venezuela, sinasabi niya, they still recognize Maduro as their president. And how come ang U.S.-backed opposition ay hindi sinusuportahan ni Trump ngayon?
Yes, so now there's also a domestic political dynamics in Venezuela as far as that is concerned. So we don't know whether the current government in Venezuela, led by the interim president, will mobilize the armed forces to resist U.S. action or to resist further U.S. military activities in Venezuela, because Trump says that it wants to rule Venezuela in order to control development of oil and also of vital minerals of Venezuela. So let's see whether this will lead to interstate military conflict between U.S. and Venezuela, and whether the international community will support Venezuela. Because right now, there are important states calling for the United States to release Maduro and respect the sovereignty of Venezuelan government.
Yeah, even kasi
like China, Russia, and even Brazil.
Oo, even his custody, 'di ba? Tinatanong saan ba siya dapat makulong?
Yes. So we can see here also double standard on the part of Donald Trump, that while it resists dictatorship of Maduro, it continues to support also and forging friendly relations with other dictators in the world.
North
so
Korea.
There's Trump is making a lot of mixed signals that make the world, many world leaders now in other situations.
But
Yes, go ahead.
But do you also believe what other analysts are saying, that this is just all about controlling the oil reserves of Venezuela, all about petrodollar?
Well, that's one important angle. It's about the control of oil and also the control of petrodollars in Latin America. But also, there are also other geopolitical implications like major power relationship. Okay? Because right now, China is expanding its influence in Latin America by implementing a lot of Belt and Road initiatives in Latin America and engaging Latin America very, very closely, especially in the context of BRICS. So, mobilizing Brazil as the leader in Latin America now. With U.S. action in Venezuela, U.S. is giving a strong signal to China that Latin America is under American influence. And it is consistent with the current national security strategy of the United States under Trump, when it prioritizes control of Western Hemisphere in its national security strategy.
That's it's mabuti, Prof, na nabanggit mo yan. No? Kasi if you look at the geopolitical map, parang ang labanan ngayon, painting the map between red and blue. Madaming mga scenarios. But ang tanong ko dito, do you see Trump moving in on the Americas this time? Kasi nag-veer away na siya from politics, geopolitics from the Middle East eh.
Yes. So, from pivot to Asia of Barack Obama that lasted until the Biden administration, Trump is now focusing his attention in the Western Hemisphere, covering largely Latin America and North America. So, that's the priority of Trump because Trump is very pragmatic also. He sees the potential of Venezuela in ensuring the oil supply and meeting the oil needs of the United States and making the petrodollar strong because its influence in the Arab world is declining. So it's expanding its influence in Latin America. And we already know that Venezuelan oil reserve represents 1/5 of the total oil reserves in the world. So controlling Venezuela is also controlling the supply of oil in the global market.
I wanted to ask you now, while there is an outcry, individual outcry of different leaders sa ginawa ni President Trump, pero parang walang condemnation ginawa ang NATO and G7. Kasi alam natin,
haven't heard anything.
critical tong G7 if they back the US. Then, sabi nila, you might see more sweeping, anong word? Invasion ba? Or sweeping arrests of dictators along Central America?
Well, because we all know that NATO is under the operational control of the United States.
That's right.
NATO will be useless without the United States. So don't expect a lot from NATO and don't expect a lot from G7. But what I'm expecting is for European states to also take a stand because it took strongly against Russia when it took military actions against Ukraine. And there's also a similarity that U.S. is taking control of Venezuela, although Russia and Russian action in Ukraine has different history with American action in Venezuela. But the question here now is the use of force. Okay? The use of force arbitrarily without domestic support and international approval.
Yun
because
nga,
remember,
eh,
during the global war on terrorism, when the United States declared a war against Afghanistan, it requested the approval of the UN Security Council to take military action. Okay? So we need that kind of situation. That's why, as we speak now, the UN Security Council will meet today to address the current situation now in Venezuela.
Okay, so having said that, Prof, does this situation set precedent naman or precedent for the future U.S. action toward other contested regimes?
I'm not worried about American future actions. I'm also worried about the future actions of other major powers that it can be done. That it can be done. China can do it, Russia can do it, India can do it. So it gives example to other major powers that if you have military wherewithal to use force in order to advance your own interest, then you can do it.
So parang it's...
So I'm more worried about the actions of other major powers as a result of this precedent.
So parang we can look at it this way as well. It legitimizes kung ano yung ginagawa ng Russia sa Ukraine. Can we look at that way?
For me, it's not about a question of legitimacy because there's no legitimacy on the use of force. But it normalizes the use of force in international affairs. So, because for me, it's not legitimate to use the use of force. It's always legitimate to use force. But it normalizes the practice of the use of force in international affairs.
Well, Prof, one angle na titignan ng domestic lawmakers sa US is now that, they've done this move already, it was hugely unpopular. What if they install a military marshal over at Venezuela to oversee an election to be called and then have the people decide. Because if you look, international outcry, pero if you look at yung domestic reaction, parang majority ng mga regular citizens of Venezuela have supported the move of the U.S. To free them from the so-called dictator. So, is an election now the best move para para matapos na tong issue?
Well, again, it's more complicated than we see it. Domestically in Venezuela, it's more complicated than that because we know that there are forces in Venezuela against any type of dictatorship because they want democracy to experience in Venezuela. But at the same time, it also questions the actions of the United States for taking military force to remove what is called a dictator without the approval of the American Congress. So by doing that arbitrarily, then Trump is showing a genre of dictatorship also. So that's why it's more complicated than we view. That's why it's very difficult to make any informed conclusion now because events are still unfolding and there are many consequences not only for international peace and security but also for domestic security of Venezuela as well as domestic security in the United States and also regional security not only in the Western Hemisphere but also in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, we have yet to see the official statement coming from ASEAN, but I'm glad to read the official statement now of the Philippine government released by the Department of Foreign Affairs that it is conforming with the principle of international law and respect for sovereignty of states and non-interference in the domestic affairs of sovereign states.
Well, yun nga rin yung gusto namin itanong sa inyo, Prof. Given that the US is our ally, diba, dapat ba nagsasalita rin tayo against this, no? Because we're looking at this not para dun sa ano natin, dun sa whatever that we should be gaining about this, ano? So, dapat ba nagsasalita ang Pilipinas regarding this?
Yes, the Philippine government should take a strong stand on the actions of the U.S. in Venezuela. And for me, this situation should also trigger us to make a rethinking of our alliance with the United States. Do we want to be associated with a state that uses that arbitrarily uses military force against a sovereign state? So it calls for a rethinking of our alliance with the United States, and I have seen some scholars and some analysts also, and I'm also talking to some of my colleagues about the timeliness of this situation for the Philippines to rethink our alliance with the United States. Is it a kind of practice that we want to normalize in international politics, or we want to go back to the principle of the United Nations when it was created, okay, right after the Second World War. Okay, and what is the Charter of the United Nations? It's very loud and clear. Self-restraint on the use of military force, respect for the sovereignty of the states, and non-interference in the domestic affairs of sovereign states.
Right.
Those are loud and clear. And rather than use military force to resolve conflict, the United Nations Charter urges all states to use diplomacy, okay, in settling international disputes.
Paano kasi, Prof, how about yung, well, you're saying na we should take a neutral stance muna in our alliance with the U.S. Ang problema natin kasi we also have a spat with China, who is similarly using the same, well, not the same, but a amount of force to bully us in the West Philippine Sea. Now, if we veer away from the U.S. and other Western powers na ka-align ng U.S., where do we stand now? What happens then to us?
Well, we can analyze the situation in the context of the South China Sea, and it shows, it shows that if U.S. decides to use its military force to assert its interest in the South China Sea, then it can do it. Because right now China cannot count the United States for its actions in in Venezuela is only like a moral suasion, asking the United States to release Maduro, to respect international law. So it's like a moral situation. But China now, it reveals the weakness of China, that China does not have equivalent military force to prevent the U.S. from what it did in Venezuela. So if the U.S. decides to use military force in the South China Sea, if the U.S. decides to use military force in Taiwan, then it has the wherewithal. Now the thinking now for China, if U.S. uses military force in the South China Sea, or more so in Taiwan, okay, can China retaliate also militarily? So
Right.
that begs the question. But for me, I'm very much worried about that situation because we are hosting American military facilities in Philippine territories, and the United States can mobilize all these American military facilities to advance its military interests not only in the Asia Pacific but also in the whole world. So the Philippines will be dragged in a conflict that not of our own choosing. Okay, so if U.S. decides to involve in any military conflict in the Asia Pacific, the Philippines will be involved because of our existing alliance, and it applies not only to the Philippines but also to Australia, to Japan, to South Korea. So I am closely watching the actions of Australia, South Korea, Japan, and other allies in the Asia Pacific region, whether or not they approve this kind of military action in Venezuela.
Well, of course, some people cannot help but compare such arrest kay former President Rodrigo Duterte. But of course, the way we are seeing this, yung pag-arrest naman kay kay Pangulong Duterte ay may involvement ng ICC. Ganun po ba 'yon?
Well, for me, it's not only about comparing it with the arrest of President Duterte, but we can go back as far as early as 1986.
I'm sorry, Prof, we didn't hear that.
We can trace it as early as 1986 when the United States decided to quote-unquote kidnap the Marcos family and brought it to its nearest military base in Guam. It happened in 1986 also. A regime change, and the U.S. took military action by ferrying the Marcos family to Guam. Okay.
Wait, you said kidnap. That's a strong word. Pero di ba parang alam natin is they ask help from the U.S.?
Well, that's why I said quote-unquote, because that was the term used by one of the families.
So Prof, I'd like
members of the family.
Prof, I'd like to ask about the UN. No? While you mentioned kasi ang role ng UN after the World War was to establish a world order and to make sure that each country respects each rule of law and sovereign as a sovereign, independent sovereign nation. Ang question dito, ang dami nagsasabi that the UN also has failed in many ways to protect the human being at the grassroots level. Na you look at nations around the world, not only Venezuela but around the world, ang daming bansa na sa Africa pa lang where the human being or the are persecuted politically, and the UN always mentions let's just respect and resolve this domestically. Sabi nga nila for evil to flourish, it's for good men to do nothing. Ang pinaka question dito is should the UN rethink its mandate on how to deal with nations that are oppressing their own people?
Well, right now, UN is in continuous rethinking of its original mandate in 1945.
Yes, that's
so
right.
it continues. But regarding the situation that you mentioned in Africa and other parts of the world with existing internal armed conflict, remember the UN also made a lot of innovation also by sending peacekeeping forces and at the same time implementing principles like responsibility to protect. That if the states are failed states, then the international community has the moral responsibility to get involved internally in order to protect civilians from existing conflicts. So it's very unfair to make such kind of conclusion against the United Nations because, yeah, we know the UN is not a perfect international organization, but the world will be more dangerous without the United Nations.
But
So, is that the kind of world do we want to go back to a situation when there is no international organization upholding this kind of principle? So, let's see, because the actions of the United States in Venezuela is in fact challenging the very principle that the U.S. erected right after the Second World War.
Actually, the pushback sa UN was not so much to remove them or to being unfair to them. I think the pushback against the UN was saying that they should rethink or strengthen yung ngipin ng UN to be a more powerful organization that can really control what's happening in terms of the world order. Kasi let's face it, hindi nila kaya ang United States at this point.
You know, Angela, I am teaching international politics and teaching both theories and practice of international relations. UN is an intergovernmental organization, and it cannot do a lot when it comes to the sovereignty of a state. So the reality of international politics as we speak is, in fact, the reality is anarchy. There's an international anarchy, and the UN is trying to address the harsh effect of this international anarchy. And American action in Venezuela only reaffirms that international politics is in the state of international anarchy. Then the question is, do we want this international anarchy to prevail at the expense of the sovereign state? That's the reason why they created the UN. You know, the UN is a product of what I call idealism in international politics. What is the idealism? That the world can be, that we can maintain international peace and security, that we can prevent international war, that all states can coexist, okay? Yung concept of peaceful coexistence, that wars can be ended, okay? And if cannot be ended, wars can be prevented, okay? So right now, we need to renew our debate on the need for preventive diplomacy to be discussed again in international relations, because we cannot afford to normalize this kind of practice.
Actually,
because if this practice is normalized, then that will not prevent other major powers to do the same.
Yeah, actually, we're not saying naman in-normalize, but we're finding ways to strengthen the UN because we want a strong UN, of course, para walang umiibabaw ng tulad ng US and ano. Kasi paano natin papalakasin ng UN, Prof?
Again, there are many proposals already. There are many proposals, and one is to reform the UN Security Council and to reform the Secretariat, and also to reform the whole structure of the UN. We need a one semester to do that. So there are many reforms being discussed now, but you know, implementing this reform takes time, because we are dealing with sovereign states, and the UN is not a supranational organization like the European Union. It is still an intergovernmental organization, meaning it is an organization of sovereign states. So implementing this reform really takes slow.
Okay.
But UN is trying to reform itself, and the reform started even during the time of Kofi Annan, or even Boutros Ghali. There are many proposals already to strengthen the United Nations.
Okay.
But you know, right now is that American action in Venezuela is undermining the relevance of the United Nations.
Okay. Well, lastly, Prof, as we question what US has done to Venezuela, of course, pinag-uusapan natin kanina pa yung sinabi ni Trump that they will run Venezuela government for the meantime. Of course, yung tanong dito about the oil reserve ng Venezuela. So what happens now then? Because the US, according to Trump, sabi nila, they will take over even yung pagkuha nga ng oil reserve sa Venezuela. So can they actually do that? And what happens?
If the US will really do that, it will really threaten the principle of sovereignty. Because Venezuela should be run not by the United States, but by the Venezuelan people. So do we want other countries to run Myanmar? Do we want other countries to run the Philippines? We want Filipinos to run the Philippines. We want Venezuelan to run Venezuela. Okay.
But who will stop
We
the
want the
U.S.?
Americans to run the United States of America.
Oo.
So if the U.S. decides to run Venezuela against the will of the Venezuelan people, for me, that's classic colonialism.
Oh. Well, the question is, di ba, who will stop them? Because
And if its interest is to control the resources of Venezuela, for me, that's vintage American imperialism.
all right, with that,
Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Romel Banlawi, President of the Philippine Society for International Security Studies.
Thank you, Angela and Angelo. God bless you.
thank you so much. We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. Good morning. You're still watching News and Views here on One News. As the post-holiday rush continues, thousands of travelers are still making their way back to Metro Manila. We go live now to PITX in Parañaque with our mobile journal, Francis Rivera. Francis, kamusta na ang sitwasyon dyan?
Angelo, tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung pagdating ng mga kapatid natin na galing sa kanilang probinsya matapos nga itong holiday season. Pero kung makapapansin natin sa aking likuran, no, medyo manipis pa itong volume ng mga pasahero. Pero sabi nga ng mga bus company o ng mga bus liner na nakausap natin dito, ay inaasahan nga nila ang dagsa niyan mamayang hapon hanggang mamayang gabi. Pero sinulit na nga yung mga ilang kapatid natin, sinulit na nga itong weekend dahil nagsiuwian na sila mula nung Friday hanggang nitong Sunday kahapon. Pero yun nga, inaasahan pa rin nila na tuloy-tuloy yung dagsa ng mga kapatid natin na mag-uuwian ngayong unang Lunes o first Monday ng taon na ito. Angelo.
Ngayon, parang sa binabanggit mo ngayon, ang exact peak, no? Ang question dito, kamusta naman ang traffic situation sa perimeter ng PITX area? Kasi although tapos na ata yung inaayos na Ross Boulevard, no? Pero isang parts of EDSA, alam ko, yung mga bus lanes occupied eh.
Yes, Angelo, nung papunta pa lang tayo dito sa PITX, medyo heavy-gat na rin talaga yung daloy ng trapiko, no? Yung papunta dito sa PITX along Roas Boulevard or along dito sa may Asiana, no?
Yeah.
Medyo madami na rin kasi yung volume ng mga sasakyan na nagdumadaan doon sa, especially dito sa may Asiana, no, na lalabas papunta Ross Boulevard. So medyo malaki yung volume at sabayan pa nga nitong mga bus na nagsisidatingan. Kaya medyo mabigat yung daloy ng trapiko. Pero pagkatapos nga dito sa may Asiana, papunta dito sa may Coastal Road, tuloy-tuloy naman na yung daloy ng trapiko.
Francis, wala naman na reported na aberya sa mga trips, no, ditong holiday kasi I heard madaming protocols in place na hindi natin masyadong nabanggit before na medyo mahigpit ang pamunuan ng PATX with regards to yung roadworthiness ng mga bus tsaka yung drivers.
So far, Angelo, wala pa tayo nakukuhang report, no, at detalye kung meron bang mga aberya. Pero yung mga tinanong mga nakaraang araw na naandito tayo, no, tinatanong natin yung mga bus company kung meron bang mga cancel trip or meron bang kailangang ayusin sa kanilang bus. Ang sabi nga nila, bago pa naman sila bumiyahe o yung pagdating nga ng mga bus dito, nagpapahinga muna ng ilang oras. Kaya pansamantala munang pinapahinga nila yung mga bus bago sila bumiyahe. At ganun din yung kondisyon ng mga driver nila at yung mga karelyebo nila. So hanggang ngayon wala pa tayo nakukuhang report na nagkaroon ng aperya nitong holiday season.
That's
Angelo,
good.
Angela?
Mabuti naman yan, Francis.
Alright, maraming salamat, Mobile Journal. Francis Rivera reporting live from PITX. Of course, before we move forward, a few minutes ago, President Bongbong Marcos has already signed the 6.793 trillion General Appropriations Act for 2026 law into
We
law.
now have a budget.
Yun, meron na tayong budget. Pero of course, wala pang sinasabi dito kung meron ba siyang veto. Wala pa tayong
Wala pang
balita
report.
doon. And few minutes ago as well, I think an hour ago na pala yun, there's also a report na before siya mag-sign ng budget natin, I think his office asked the reporters there to surrender their phones. So we don't know the details on that yet. So parang yun pala yung nakikita
So, wala pa
natin.
tayong report.
Bakit, 'di ba? What's the reason behind it? Bakit siya pinapa-surrender yung phone ng mga reporters as he signs
Baka
the
may certain things na iyan.
Oo, like, but of course yung mga reporters inappeal nila yung request na yon because reporters need their phone to record nga the event. So we'll get more details on that later on.
Alright, now let's check the situation at the bus terminals in Cubao. We have mobile journalist Jazz Paredes. Jazz, kamusta naman ang pagdagsa ng mga tao sa Cubao area or medyo kalmado na ba?
Diego, Angelado, mas marami pa rin naman dumadating dito sa Cubao Bus Terminals pero kung ikukumpara kahapon ay mas kalmado na daw yung dagsa ng mga arrivals mula sa iba't ibang probinsya. At kanina, nagtanong-tanong tayo sa ilang mga pasahero kung kamusta yung kanilang biyahe mula sa kanilang mga probinsya. May ilan tayong nakausap na ngayong araw lamang nakarating dahil na-delay yung kanilang bus mula doon sa probinsya. At dahil sobrang dami daw ng papauwi o bugso ng dami doon sa kanilang probinsyang paggagalingan, ay hindi sila nakapag-book ng bus na direkta papunta dito sa Metro Manila at kailangan nilang magdalawang sakay. Nagbiyahe pa sila papuntang northbound at pabalik dito sa Metro Manila para lamang makasakay sila ng biyahe pa uwi. At ayon naman dun sa pamunuan ng terminal na nakausap natin kanina, ay marami pa rin dumadagsang tao dito na galing sa kanilang probinsya, pero expected daw yan na baka mamayang hapon pa mas dumami yung dagsa ng mga tao. Although wala naman daw tayong mga fully booked na arrivals mula sa iba't ibang probinsya, pero marami pa rin daw mga bumabiyahe hanggang ngayon. At ito, papakita ko sa inyo yung sitwasyon dito. Ito yung ating mga travelers naman na pabalik sa kanilang mga probinsya. Kung makikita natin, hindi na siya puno at kakaunti na lamang yung mga pasahero na nagbubuk ng kanilang mga bus pabalik. Itong nakikita nating bus dito ay papunta yung Baguio, San Fernando, and Lingayen. And kung ikukumpara natin yan, Angela and Diego, nung sa unang punta natin dito before bagong taon, ay noon punong-puno talaga at halos wala nang masakyan ng mga bus. Pero ngayon ay hindi pa napupuno yung mga bus at nag-aantay pa sila ng mga pasahero hanggang sa ngayon. At ngayon din naman, meron din tayong mga nakausap kanina na pa-southbound naman na mga biyahe. Meron doon mga fully booked na mga buses, Camarines Norte and Camarines Sur and Albay. Pero ayon naman sa pamunuan ng terminal, ay makakasakay naman yung mga chance passengers. Unlike noon, na kahit chance passengers, hindi talaga makakasakay sa mga bus. So mas maluwag and mas okay mag-travel para sa mga biyahero natin ngayon, Diego and Angela.
Alright, thank you for the updates, mobile journalist Jazz Paredes.
Now, starting this week, the Land Transportation Office, or LTO, will further tighten the ban on e-trikes and e-bikes on major roads across Metro Manila. According to LTO Chief Marcos Lacanilao, e-trikes and e-bikes will also be prohibited along Commonwealth Avenue and Quezon Avenue in Quezon City, as well as Marcos Highway and Sumulong Highway in Rizal and Marikina. The ban on e-trikes was earlier implemented along EDSA, C5 Road, Rojas Boulevard, and Quirino Avenue last week. Violators face fines of up to 1,500 pesos, and vehicles may also be impounded if e-trikes and e-bikes are caught using major roads.
Don't go away because we're not done yet. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching News and Views here on The One News. Content creator Small Laude denied that her husband, Philip Laude, was involved in any illegal activities after reports linked him to a joint bank account with Representative Edvic Yap. Her legal representatives at Divina Law said Philip Laude is a private businessman with legitimate enterprises and has never participated in or benefited from any unlawful transactions. Now, the firm clarified that the proposed venture with Yap was preliminary and exploratory and never became a formal partnership. The joint account was opened solely to explore the opportunity and was closed before Yap assumed public office. Divina Law stressed that linking Philip Laude to alleged irregularities is factually baseless and misleading, noting that preparatory discussions before public office do not constitute wrongdoing.
With just a month of left before a new impeachment complaint may be filed against Vice President Sara Duterte, ACT Teachers Party List Representative Antonio Tino says lawmakers are ready to act. Mobile Journal Amy Atienza reports.
With just a month left before complainants could file another impeachment complaint against Vice President Sara Duterte, ACT Teachers Party List Representative Antonio Tino continued to acknowledge the role of the Supreme Court in this case. The SC declared that the impeachment articles against Duterte were unconstitutional as it barred the one-year rule under the 1987 Constitution. Any subsequent impeachment complaint may only be filed on February 6, 2026.
Well, kung kinakailangan ay handa tayong mag-endorsong muli, no? Pero hindi natin dapat pangunahan ang Supreme Court. As you know, hindi natin dapat pangunahan ang Supreme Court dahil meron kang pending motion for reconsideration doon.
Once the Supreme Court changes its ruling, the impeachment trial against the Vice President will continue in the Senate. This means that there is no need to refile another impeachment complaint, which Tino is hopeful for. But also given the circumstances of no changes in the ruling, Tino also said that the Makabayan bloc is ready to give it another shot.
Malamang no, na itutuloy ng mga complainants ang filing, so handa tayong mag-endorse. At maaaring madagdagan pa yung mga lalamanin ng complaint given na may mga bagong impormasyon na lumabas.
The congressman also recognized the testimony of Ramil Madriaga, an alleged former civil intelligence agent of VP Sara, to be an integral part for the new complaint. Madriaga once testified that there was an alleged involvement of Philippine offshore gaming operators and drug dealers that funded VP Sara's 2022 election campaign.
Oo, kasama doon yung affidavit ni Madriaga, lalo pa at binabanggit ni Madriaga yung mga susing tao sa ano nangyari sa confidential fund, no?
Vice President Sara Duterte has yet to speak on the matter, but his recent survey results show the Vice President improved its trust rating from the public to 56% from the 53% much trust rating last September 2025. Kapatid Amy Atienza, we are One News.
After securing public safety during the holidays, the Philippine National Police is now turning its focus to the annual feast of Jesus Nazareno on January 9. The PNP will deploy around 15,000 personnel for crowd control, traffic management, and emergency response. They will be assisted by the local government of Manila, MMDA, and other concerned agencies. Meanwhile, a code white alert will be in effect in public hospitals across Metro Manila and nearby regions.
Now in sports, Filipina tennis star Alex Ayala is welcoming the new season with confidence, sharing an upbeat Instagram post ahead of her 2026 campaign. Posting a throwback photo on court, Ayala wrote, "Nobody say I didn't manifest it," as she kicked off the year ranked world number 53 and seeded 4th at the ASB Classic in Auckland. The post reflects the 20-year-old's growing confidence as she gears up for the Australian Open, where she is set to make her main draw debut.
Okay, Angel, may ano ka?
Yeah, all right. So
updates, no?
yeah,
on the
update
budget.
on the budget.
Good
So as
timing.
we said earlier, President Bongbong Marcos has already signed into law the 6.793 trillion national budget for 2026, and he actually vetoed 92.5 billion in unprogrammed appropriations. Ito na yung pinag-uusapan natin all throughout the week, 'di ba?
Pinupuntirya ng
ibang mga lawmakers na dapat walang unprogrammed appropriations. Walang unprogrammed ang program appropriation. So, vinito na niya yon, and of course...
yun lang ang vinito ba
Vinito. Yun, so far, ito
So
lang
far,
nakikita
yun
ko
pala,
dito. And the
reports.
education sector received the highest allocation, which is 1.3 trillion funding nila. And of course, healthcare sector received its highest budget ever, which is 448.125 billion. Of course, to fund yung Department of Health, Universal Healthcare Fund, zero balance billing, etc. So, yun.
New year, new budget. Yun. So, yan ang update sa atin. But of course, stay tuned, no? Sa One News, One PH, TV5 for more updates on yung kung ano pa yung nangyari sa budget signing.
This is actually the first time President Bongbong Marcos has signed the budget after fiscal year end. God bless you.
Allergy po yan, allergy yan.
So, yun. Kasi nga, di ba, we were expecting dapat na masign niya yun before the year ends, pero hindi pwede because he needed to review. And we acted on yung budget natin 2025. 1 week lang naman. So, ito na ngayon.
Alright. Hello everyone. It's the first Monday of the year. Stay sharp, be positive, and wag na ipagpaliban yung mga resolution. Gawin niyo na starting today. And that wraps up today's episode of News and Views.
Join us again tomorrow. I'm Angela Lagunsad Castro.
I'm Angelo Castro III. Kapatid, we are One News.
All sides, all the time.